And tell me a little bit the profile of your association, the size banks. Are they a billion in assets, or what's the typical profile? Where's the concentration of banks in general?
The best way to explain that would be the makeup of my board. I'll see if I can remember this off the top of my head. We are 8 small banks, 5 large banks, 2 CDCs, 2 service providers. I think I covered them all, but it runs the gamut. We have the small community banks, or smaller community banks, that tend to be the largest concentration of membership, and then large institutions, the Wells Fargos, the JP Morgan Chases, and all of the small business lending companies that would participate in the program as well.
Do you have many community banks? Did you mention that? Do you have
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the largest single membership category is community banks.
Okay. And you're mentioning today that just your volume's down, decreased lender participation. What's driving that? I mean, because I know one thing, being in Florida, a lot of banks are also under a lot of pressure. Their capital, and they're having to shrink. A lot of things that they're doing. I'm just wondering how much of that is where they're looking at really their whole portfolio in general, or asset portfolio, and I'm just wondering how much of that
it'd be a whole list of things.
Yeah.
There are much more costs being passed on to lenders and borrowers today than in the past. It is a more difficult economic time. Lenders have pulled in their range and have a little tighter credit standards. And there have been issues in the marketplace, such as an inverted yield curve that has made lending more difficult. And there's a whole host of things that seem to have converged at one point. But clearly, the fees and costs of the program are a major contributing factor.
You're talking about their lending criteria, tighter lending criteria. How much of that, how much of a proponent is that in what you said, do you think?
Well, it probably shows up in the 7A program most in the SBA Express program, which is primarily a credit-scored product. And lenders, as times became tough, immediately changed their minimum credit score requirement to get conventional loans and for SBA loans. So you'll see that as a subset of the 7A program, our SBA Express program is down quite a bit, quite substantially in terms of numbers of loans.
What
over
about
20%.
Lenders giving lending to established franchise companies? Is that a big part of the business, a small part? So you've got someone that comes to you that...
It's some. I do not know off the top of my head volume of lending to franchises. That's not a sub-program number I've seen in quite some time.
But it's not, you don't know if they're aggressively lending to people interested in buying a franchise, or just not, just curious?
Well, each lender has their own business plan as to the types of businesses they'd like to finance, from community banks that tend to finance all of them to sometimes we have specialty lenders that would gear their program towards, say, a franchise operation. I know that there are some SBA lenders with franchise lending divisions, but I don't know what kind of volume franchise lending would total in the program.
I was just curious. Mr. Crawford, what the CDC you mentioned, what's the trend line on lending there? I think you covered it a little bit, but in terms of CDCs.
Well, we are, you mean for long term?
Yeah.
We as I indicated, we're flat this year, which is kind of surprising. I've been through probably, I don't know, Tony, 3 recessions in the last 18 years. I would have thought lending would still be running higher because, as Tony indicated, we are tending to be a counter-cyclical program. The banks will turn to an enhancement vehicle like 504 fairly rapidly because they can lend 50% and still have a first lien position. I suspect we're in the early stages of a recession, if you want to call it that, and I suspect that there are a lot of small businesses that are sort of pulling back their horns to wait and see how their own businesses, their own revenue streams are going to go. And then I think that we will probably see some resumption of some small business lending later in the year. So I have real high hopes. That's why I indicated that I believe that we're going to run close to $7 billion this year, and I'm very concerned about next year because I think then our program's historic balance will kick in, and I think you will see banks turn to 504, and I don't want to be sitting there with $7.5 billion in authority. It'll be pretty rough for us, and I assume that y'all would the SBA would have to cut off lending at some point. So I have high hopes that the program will get back on its historic growth pattern of 8 to 15%.